Eyewitness accounts and vivid personal recollections bring to life the story of D-Day to Berlin in this book, which accompanies the series. Do you or someone you know have special memories of World War II? If so, you can share your story at bbc.co.uk/WW2. So, on BBC4 Now, Richard Holmes follows in the footsteps of Winston Churchill. Or stay with us here on BBC One for the 10 o'clock news. That's next.
I believe it's the right thing to do. Of course. You're right.
For the first time ever on the same programme, the leaders of the Labour, Liberal Democrat and Conservative parties will take voters' questions live on television. Join us for the Question Time Leaders Special, tomorrow, 8:30, BBC One.
This is BBC One in the West. Now the news at 10 o'clock with Hugh Edwards and David Garmston.
New questions tonight about the legality of the war in Iraq. Part of the Attorney General's secret advice to Tony Blair has been leaked. His opponents claim it proves he did change his opinion.
It's now clear that that advice did change, and we must now be told what or who changed it.
I believe that if the House of Commons had known of the contents of the legal advice of the 7th of March, it would never have voted to endorse military action.
But within the past hour, Lord Goldsmith insisted the leaked document simply backed up his case. Also tonight, the world's biggest passenger plane takes off on its maiden flight. The highest award, a VC for the soldier who saved the lives of comrades in Iraq. And no quarter given as Liverpool hold Chelsea in their Champions League showdown. In the West, how we made it fly, the genius of the West Country engineers who made the wings for the Airbus. And the centre of Bristol is sealed off for hours in a gas alert. The details in half an hour. Good evening. Tony Blair's decision to invade Iraq is under the spotlight again. The BBC has obtained a summary of confidential advice given to the Prime Minister by the Attorney General, Lord Goldsmith. A fortnight before the war, Lord Goldsmith seemed to acknowledge there could be some doubts about the legality of an invasion. Well, tonight, the Conservative leader, Michael Howard, said that Lord Goldsmith had subsequently changed his opinion and voters deserve to know why. Now, in the past hour, Lord Goldsmith has issued a statement insisting that the war had been lawful, and that was the opinion presented to the Cabinet. James Robbins has been studying the document.
Lord Goldsmith, can you react to the news this evening that you're...
Tonight, the Attorney General refused to answer questions about the leak, but later released a statement saying he stood by his opinion that it was legal for Britain to go to war in Iraq. The BBC was given this two-page document this afternoon, apparently part of the so far secret advice given to Tony Blair as he wrestled with the question, would the invasion of Iraq be legal? The leak seems to suggest Lord Goldsmith was far less certain then that it would be than he was just 10 days later in advice to Parliament, which was published. All this happened as Britain was struggling and ultimately failing to get a second United Nations resolution specifically authorising the use of force. Instead, the government relied on earlier resolutions as legal cover for war. The new document quotes Lord Goldsmith, "I remain of the opinion that the safest legal course would be to secure the adoption of a further resolution to authorise the use of force." And without that resolution, Lord Goldsmith apparently advises Tony Blair, "You would need to be able to demonstrate hard evidence of Iraqi non-compliance and non-cooperation."
You have the floor, sir.
The problem with that, on the very same day, Hans Blix, the UN Chief Weapons Inspector, was reporting significant cooperation by Saddam's regime. And only the United States and Britain, among 15 members of the Security Council, backed a new resolution to authorise war. But only 10 days later, and without a new resolution, the attorney's published legal advice looks quite different. All that Resolution 1441 requires is reporting to and discussion by the Security Council of Iraq's failures, but not an express further decision to authorise force. Tonight, all this exploded into the election campaign.
Well, we now know that on the 7th of March 2003, the Attorney General gave his advice, and it was full of qualifications and caveats. The Prime Minister has said that when the Attorney General gave his advice to the Cabinet on the 17th of March, just 10 days later, it was clear, and the Prime Minister also said that the Attorney General didn't change his advice. It's now clear that that advice did change, and we must now be told what or who changed it.
I believe that if the House of Commons had known of the contents of the legal advice of the 7th of March, it would never have voted to endorse military action, and I strongly suspect that if every member of the Cabinet had seen a copy of that legal advice, others may have resigned along with Robin Cook.
But tonight the Attorney General issued a statement insisting his opponents had got it wrong. Lord Goldsmith said the leak stands up the case that the government has been making all along. For Tony Blair, the timing of this leak could hardly be worse. It has reignited controversy over the war in Iraq at the most damaging possible moment. James Robbins, BBC News.
Well, let's examine this latest development with our political editor, Andrew Marr at Westminster. Andrew, differing views, I think it's fair to say, on just how significant this document is. What do you make of it?
Well, let's recall, first of all, that for 2 years now, the Attorney General's legal advice has been close to the centre of a ferocious national argument about the legality of the war in Iraq. And tonight we finally have the key document, and it is kosher, it is the real thing. It's not the whole document, but it's a very important part of it. Now, what does it show? First of all, it shows that the Attorney General, like so many lawyers, is sitting rather uneasily on a painful splintered fence. He is giving both sides of the argument. He is weighing up the arguments very carefully. It does not show that he was of the view that the war was illegal and then 10 days later changed his mind. It's a very, very interesting document, but it doesn't stink quite of sulphur.
Well, we've already had a response, a very critical response from some of the opposition parties. Andy, how's it likely to impact on next week's campaigning, do you think?
Well, I think the first thing is it's going to dominate tomorrow as well, so the Labour Party has lost yet more days to the Iraq conflict when they wanted to be talking about other things. I think the crucial question is what happens over the 10 days between this very, very detailed, argumentative, agonised document and the much simpler, clearer, starker advice that the war was legal that finally went to Cabinet, because they didn't see this document, Hugh. And what happens, of course, partly, is a huge international crisis, which has changed this country and changed the Prime Minister's reputation. Enormous pressure on the British government, allied with George Bush and Washington, British soldiers out there waiting to go to war in Iraq. All of that pressure coming on individuals, including the Attorney General. So there will be an intense political argument about that period. All I can say, I think, at this stage, is that the Attorney General gave cautious advice and then under pressure clarified, hardened that advice and forced to come off the fence, that painful fence, jumped off on the side of war. Quite why is a matter for him.
Andrew, many thanks. Well, earlier today, the Chancellor Gordon Brown voiced his support for Tony Blair, insisting he had spoken the truth about Iraq, that going to war had been the right thing to do. Our chief political correspondent, Mark Mardell, spent the day on the campaign trail with Mr. Brown.
This is chaos, isn't it? Hello.
This election is getting messy.
Oh, yes. Well done.
Not a hint of prudence there from a relaxed Chancellor touring West Midlands marginals and the Sure Start scheme. If Labour wins in 9 days' time, it's a fair bet this man will be Prime Minister before the next general election. As he leaves one college, a woman tells him he should be leader now.
I'm happy being Chancellor.
We want him to be Prime Minister, and if he becomes Prime Minister... Blair? Oh, absolutely. Everybody I speak to does.
Why?
Because we trust him.
These people are still learning on the job. Friends think Mr. Brown has been made to serve too long an apprenticeship. At times his relationship with Tony Blair has been horrendous. His support for the Iraq war has seemed lukewarm. So, with Mr. Blair under maximum pressure this week, how would he respond? What do you think of the charge that he lies? He's a liar.
I don't think that's correct at all. And anybody who worked with Tony Blair over the Iraq war knows that these were difficult decisions to make, but the central issue in the Iraq war was, should you allow Saddam Hussein to continue to ignore for year after year the decisions of the international community?
So the war was right, in your view?
The war was right because Saddam Hussein should not be allowed to continue to ignore the decisions of the international community, decisions that he ignored year after year, and if we had left Saddam Hussein in a position where he could continue to ignore the decisions of the international community, then the world would not be as safe a place as it is now, and we would not have a democratic Iraq.
And did Mr. Blair tell the truth about that war, the whole truth?
Yes, Mr. Blair did tell the truth.
3 seats visited, and back on the train he tells me enthusiastically about a speech on Britishness and the EU's need to change. But what about change for him? Friends believe he'll be inside number 10 sooner rather than later, but Mr. Blair has said he'll serve a full term. What does that mean?
That's a matter for him, because he has given that statement, and it's not a matter for me to disagree.
Do you know what it means? Has a deal been done, in other words?
Not at all. Look, I didn't know that Tony Blair was going to make a statement about my role as Chancellor, and he did so during the first stages of the campaign. He didn't talk to me about doing that.
You really didn't know?
No, and it was a surprise to me that that was done. I did not ask him to do it, and I did not expect it to be done.
The unexpected can, of course, be pleasant or otherwise. And Mr. Brown says the only future he's concentrating on now is getting Labour re-elected. Mark Mardell, BBC News, the West Midlands.
Well, the latest opinion polls indicate that Labour is maintaining a clear lead over the other parties, and despite all the attacks on Mr. Blair, a new survey suggests that he's well in the lead on the question of who would make the best Prime Minister. Here's Peter Snow.
So how is Michael Howard's attack on the Prime Minister's integrity going down? Well, tomorrow's poll in The Guardian asked people if they agree that Mr. Blair is a liar. 44% of those polled by ICM agree with that and say yes. Fewer people, 29%, reckon Mr. Howard's a liar. But then, remarkably, asked who will make the best Prime Minister, 44% say Mr. Blair, the same number that call him a liar. And that's 6% up on last week, whereas Mr. Howard is down to 22. His attack doesn't seem to have helped his own leadership rating. Not that staying aloof from the name-calling has helped Charles Kennedy. He's also down on last week to 19%. Well, now 6 polls in this half of the week give Labour a lead varying from 10% in NOP to only 2% in Moray. But there's something special about Moray that may explain their poorer showing for Labour. Their figures, and here they are, with that 2% lead, include only those who say they're absolutely certain to vote. None of the other pollsters go quite that far. When Moray include all respondents, they give Labour a lead of a whole 10%. And they find that whereas 80% of Tory supporters say they'll definitely turn out, only 64% of Labour supporters say they will, and Lib Dems are somewhere in the middle. Right, now, here's the state of the race with a week to go. Notice that the Lib Dems this week have won 24% rating, their best in recent memory. Average them all out, and Labour's slender initial lead has now widened to 39 to 32. That's a 7% gap. Translate all that into the swing from the last election, and we'll see what sort of a House of Commons we would get. Now, the Tories need a 6.5% swing to destroy Tony Blair's majority. But the average of the polls tonight is suggesting a swing to them of just 1%. Mr. Blair would have a majority of around 150. Even if the Tories win the turnout battle, even if you allow for a large error in these opinion polls, Labour look pretty powerfully placed with just a week to go, Hugh.
Peter Snow there. Well, on the campaign trail today, education and more particularly discipline in schools got most attention. Labour's Ruth Kelly said the teachers would get more powers to tackle low-level disruption in the classrooms, but the Conservatives accused her of making up policy as she went along. Our social affairs editor Mark Easton reports now.
It is many parents' nightmare that chaos in the classroom is ruining their child's chances of a decent education. Now, secret filming by a supply teacher for a TV documentary reveals just the kind of behaviour that prompted the Conservatives to make school discipline a key plank of their election manifesto.
Violence in the classroom, disruption in the classroom has been getting worse. We have to give head teachers the final say on expelling disruptive pupils. Anything else from ministers is simple rhetoric.
In a number of schools, and clearly this supply teacher has gone into a variety of schools, it's not just simply one, that there is virtually organised chaos in many, many classrooms in our country.
I really don't want you when you're in the...
One teachers' union has described the programme as sensationalist, but a poll today shows 22% of secondary teachers see pupil behaviour as the #1 educational issue. So how would the parties improve matters? The Conservatives would stop parents appealing against exclusions and replace pupil referral units with 24,000 places in so-called turnaround schools. The Liberal Democrats say smaller class sizes would improve discipline, backed up by positive behaviour plans with parents and pupils. Labour proposes a zero-tolerance approach, with teachers given power to remove badly behaved youngsters from the classroom or even the school.
Parents should recognise their responsibilities and back head teachers on what are sometimes really difficult decisions.
Now you'll hear it said that the problem is kids today, no respect. But here in Bradford, there's evidence that bad behaviour can be sorted out. 3 years ago, this school was put into special measures, the inspectors critical of the lack of discipline in the classroom. But now a new report is full of praise for the attitude of the pupils.
That's very good, Year 9. Off to a brisk start, a sense of purpose. Form tutors, all very proud of how we've turned a corner with our behaviour.
The answer has not been taking the troublemakers out, but winning them over. Exclusions are down, motivation is up.
Some of these students have a lot of needs socially, economically, and we have the job really of being the centre in the community that acts as a role model to produce the positive response from the students.
Asim Qureshi used to disrupt lessons, storming out when the mood took him. But since the school began working with him and his family, his behaviours improved markedly.
We talk about our problems without me losing it. We talk freely like friends, and then they explain everything. They go, oh, this is what you did wrong and this is what we're doing, and then...
Sounds like there's a bit of a respect there.
Yeah, I respect them, they respect me.
Bad behaviour by a few can damage the learning experience of many. It undermines confidence in the school and the education system generally. But solutions are complex because the causes are not confined to the classroom. Mark Easton, BBC News, Bradford.
Let's look at the day's other news now. The world's biggest passenger plane has completed its maiden flight. The Airbus A380 took off from the French city of Toulouse, where it's been assembled, and flew for nearly 4 hours. The plane will be capable of carrying up to 800 passengers, but it faces a further 12 months of tests before it's delivered to the airlines, as Alan Little now reports.
It is the heaviest passenger jet ever built, and it had never been off the ground. Until today, its ability to fly was only theoretical. To watch that theory tested, crowds gathered before dawn. The crew appeared confident, calm, but in the plane they carried parachutes, just in case. Airbus had billed it as the most significant maiden flight since the jumbo jet 40 years ago. Finally, its moment. 420 tons of aircraft, powered to 170 miles an hour, at which speed even this immense bulk defies gravity. These the first few seconds of a plane that could be with us for 30 or 40 years. Typically, it'll carry 550 passengers, a third more than a jumbo jet, but it can take well over 800. Its critics say it'll cause untold environmental damage. Airbus say the opposite is true, that it'll cut fuel consumption because it'll carry more people on fewer flights. At Broughton in North Wales, where its wings are made, it was the culmination of years of planning. Its British workforce celebrated a genuinely pan-European achievement. Airbus's rival Boeing have radically different ideas. Their new 787 Dreamliner is typical of the smaller planes they're now developing. Boeing say flexibility, not size, is the key, and that the A380 is a giant gamble.
Given the huge development costs and production costs which these aeroplanes incur, you've got to have really a very big market indeed in order to get a return on your capital investment. We are sceptical as to whether that return is available to Airbus for the A380.
The giant of the sky's first touchdown was flawless. It is surprisingly nimble-footed. It has more wheels than a jumbo, so each one carries less weight. Its test crew had been pretty nimble themselves.
I'm sure it's a success, yes.
And what is the future for this plane?
Great future. We have a lot of order, and we have a bit more than 1 year to develop it, to fine-tune everything, and then it will be delivered to the customer.
Boeing say the future lies in small aircraft that are more flexible and can fly in and out of small airports. Airbus have taken the other route. They have staked the future of Europe's aerospace program on the assumption that airlines will also want to buy big. Technologically, it's a marvel. Commercially, it still has much to prove. Alan Little, BBC News, Toulouse.
A British businessman faces up to 25 years in jail for attempting to provide support to terrorists in the United States. A court in New Jersey was told that Hemant Lakhani, who is 69, tried to sell a missile to an FBI agent who was posing as a Somali militant. More details from Jeremy Cook.
Caught on tape the moment Hemant Lakhani believed he'd sealed the deal. On the table in his New Jersey hotel room, a shoulder-launched missile. He thought he was dealing with Somali terrorists who wanted 50 of them to shoot down commercial airliners. But this was an FBI sting. From that moment, what followed was inevitable. Prosecutors built a painstaking case. The 69-year-old Londoner may have prayed for a miracle, but the jury's verdict was swift and damning. Guilty on all charges.
Mr. Lakhani was engaged in a scheme, willingly, knowingly, anxiously, to sell arms to those he thought were going to use those arms to kill American citizens.
With their client facing up to 25 years in prison, the defense is considering an appeal.
It's obvious he enjoyed the attention. It's obvious he was looking to make money. It's equally obvious that he hadn't been involved in anything like this before.
Throughout the trial, Hemant Lakhani insisted he was innocent. His lawyers say he's the victim of FBI entrapment, but they admit that their client is an idiot, and at times, an unsophisticated clown. Jeremy Cook, BBC News, New Jersey.
Medical teams from many parts of the world have been fighting an outbreak of a rare and terrifying disease which has already claimed more than 200 victims in Angola. There is no cure for Marburg fever, a virus similar to Ebola, which leads to death within days. The World Health Organization say 250 people have died in Angola, where the outbreak is centered on the province of Uig, 180 miles north of Luanda. From there, Barnaby Phillips sent this special report.
A disease so terrifying that those who try to control it take every precaution. The slightest contact with the Marburg virus can result in a gruesome death. They decontaminate the house before entering, inside the body of a 1-month-old baby girl. She died alone and in pain. The virus had already killed her mother. The rest of the family fled in fear. Neighbors look on in horror and in guilt. For 2 days they listened to the cries of the dying baby. They were too afraid to go in and help in case they caught the virus. A sense of dread hangs over the hospital at Uig. Staff have protection, but they've already seen 15 of their colleagues die. Touching the sick could be dangerous, but it's difficult for families not to comfort their loved ones.
This is the worst outbreak of Marburg we have ever seen. What we do to control that is we set up an isolation unit here in the hospital compound. This is the place where we try to treat, to provide medical care to the patients in a safe way for the health workers.
This is the isolation ward at Uig Hospital, if you like, the ground zero in the fight against Marburg. It's also a place that local people are terrified of, because almost every sick person who enters here is never seen again.
Inside the ward, doctors can offer no cure to a sick woman. They can only treat symptoms, vomiting and bleeding, and pray that patients recover. As they leave, they dip their feet in chlorinated water and burn any material that might be infected. Julianne Onoko is with the UN's World Health Organization. Her job is to win the trust of local people. There's been another suspected Marburg case. A girl has died. Julianne tells the family not to touch the body. It could be contagious. The doctors are here to take a blood sample. But people are still suspicious of health workers.
I asked them questions and I told them, why are you angry? And usually they tell me, because you are a vampire, you are a sorcerer, you are a witchcraft, you are stealing the bodies, you are making a traffic of organs. They tell all type of things. But because they don't have the right information, that is why they are reacting that way.
At dusk, they bury the baby who died alone. A prayer for a life destroyed that had barely begun, but no one at the graveside even knows her name. The people of Ouige survived decades of war, but today they feel the sharp pain of loss once more. Barnaby Phillips, BBC News, Ouige, Angola.
And digital viewers can get further details on the Marburg virus on our interactive service, 10 o'clock News Extra. Private Johnson Behari has become the first living soldier for 40 years to receive Britain's highest award for gallantry. The Queen presented Private Behari with the Victoria Cross in recognition of his outstanding bravery serving in Iraq. He twice saved the lives of his comrades when they were ambushed. Anita McVeigh reports now.
For services in Iraq, the Victoria Cross.
As the Queen presented Private Johnson Behari with the highest honour in the British military, she told him, "You're very special." While serving in Iraq, the 25-year-old twice risked his life to save colleagues when their patrols came under fire. This despite being seriously injured himself during one of the attacks. Afterwards, he said his actions had just been his training kicking in.
When I've done it, I didn't do it for me. Now looking back on it, if I didn't do it, I wouldn't be able to live with myself today, knowing I could have helped all the soldiers and I leave them there to die.
The head of the Army, General Sir Mike Jackson, also honoured today, hopes people will be inspired by Johnson Behari.
He risked all for others, and I hope they think about what that means. That sense of being in a team, not me all the time, but us. And that's what he represents so wonderfully.
What's remarkable is that Private Behari is alive to receive the Victoria Cross. So often it's awarded posthumously. His bravery is not without a personal cost, though, as he hasn't fully recovered yet from his injuries. Anita McVeigh, BBC News.
Football now, and Chelsea took on Liverpool this evening in the first leg of their Champions League semi-final. It's one of the most anticipated games of the season, but it ended with honours even, 0-0. Let's join Adam Parsons at Stamford Bridge.
Yes, the fans are beginning to drift away now, and I think it's Liverpool's who'll be just that bit happier after the 0-0 draw. Now, some had anticipated a real goal feast here. We didn't get that. We've got a traditional cagey European Cup tie where defence triumphed over attack. Not many Liverpool fans really expected to reach this semi-final, but they were savouring the moments and cheerfully pointing out that their team had once won the European Cup 4 times in just 7 seasons.
Right, coming up!
Still, they started as underdogs here, but it was Liverpool's John Arne Riise who forced the first save of the night. Stung by that, Chelsea improved and they should have scored, but for a glaring miss by Frank Lampard. Normally the most accomplished of finishers, this time left looking rather embarrassed. Chelsea just couldn't find their rhythm, and Liverpool's Milan Baros was only denied by a brilliant save from Petr Cech, diving and stretching to keep the game goalless. Time for Chelsea's deep-thinking Jose Mourinho to ponder again. He brought on his substitutes, but even they were firing blanks. Mattia Kezman threw on goal, preparing to shoot, and then seeing the ball thumped away from him. Liverpool cheerfully soaked up the pressure to the very end, a goalless draw, the reward for their players and fans. And in 6 days' time, they will all be at Anfield for the decisive second leg, this tie still tantalisingly balanced. Poised, because Chelsea can go through with a scoring draw up at Anfield. Liverpool will of course be playing at home, but Liverpool supporters are still facing that curious dilemma. Why is it that their team has spent the year frustrating them in the league, but delighting them in the European Cup?
Adam, thank you very much. Well, now, as this election campaign got underway, the Archbishop of Canterbury appealed for mature, responsible debate, and now another senior Anglican has called for open debate on morality, on right and wrong. In the latest of our special voters' reports, the Right Reverend James Jones, the Bishop of Liverpool, underlines the moral dimension in this campaign.
It is now 12 minutes to 8. Time for Thought of the Day, and in our Liverpool studio this morning is the Right Reverend James Jones, who is the Bishop of Liverpool.
Politicians would still have their work cut out to make sure that the system was just and that we cared for the poor.
During the election, I'd like politicians to be debating morality. We seem to have lost our moral compass. I'd like to hear politicians arguing about how we can restore to our society a sense of right and wrong, a sense of justice. Where's the justice for kids born into this kind of environment? Investment's certainly coming into Liverpool, but in many of our cities it's not yet reaching the areas that need it most. So it's not surprising that some children end up in trouble. When you got caught shoplifting, did you feel it was wrong?
Yeah.
And what did your parents say when they found out that you'd been caught?
My dad went mad. I just started crying.
Nobody pretends that these kids are all angels whose halos have slipped a bit. But in a more just society, where wealth